aftermath. No, Hugo was waking up at 3:30. And then he told us when he got stressed. And, you know, now he's done with school.
I saw he just sent an email. I haven't read through it.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah. He might have gotten better stuff.
He's got a lot. Like I skimmed his emails.
Neither of our kids. I mean, there's one person who's like really, but like, yeah. Your two are together though.
I'll keep my ears open to see if I can hear any other.
So did you all succeed with
So I'm one of the pastors here, and I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for setting this up.
Sure, I'm so glad you're here. I'm Katie.
This is my wife, Cindy.
Nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Katie.
Okay, Katie.
I think I met you briefly because I tagged
Oh my gosh,
along to
yes!
Eid.
Now I remember.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was the one that was like,
Well, me too. I was like...
Tell me your name again. Dom. Okay. And Cindy? Are you going to stay at home? You did great.
Shalom, hello, and good evening to all. My name is Amber Iqbal, and I would like to welcome you all to this special event. It is a privilege to have you all here as members of our community report back from their recent trip to the West Bank and share with us their powerful experiences. We are honored to host a diverse group of speakers today, from scholars and activists to ministers and everyday citizens. We hope that their contributions enrich our understanding and deepen our connection to this region. Our speakers tonight have witnessed firsthand the vibrant culture, rich history, and current realities of life in Palestine. They have engaged with people, learned about their daily lives, and gained a deeper understanding of the complex issues facing the region. This evening, they are here to bring those stories back to us, bridging the distance between our community and the people they have met. Our speakers will share with us not only the challenges and hardships they observed, but also the resilience, hope, and the spirit of the Palestinian people. Through their narratives, we hope to foster a greater understanding and empathy within our own community. We will hear stories of endurance and hope, the power of community, and learn about the ongoing efforts for peace and justice. We are grateful to all our speakers for their willingness to share their personal experiences. We hope that the knowledge and experiences they share with us tonight inspire us all to engage more deeply with the issues discussed and to support efforts towards a just and lasting peace. Let us carry forward the messages we hear today of fostering dialogues, understanding, and solidarity. As we listen to their presentations, I encourage all of us to reflect on the shared human experiences that unite us, and to think about how we can contribute to a more just and compassionate world. Let this evening be a starting point for continued learning and action within our community. Thank you once again for being here tonight. Your presence signifies the importance of these conversations and our collective commitment to making a positive difference. Now, without further ado, let's start the evening. I would like to invite Toby Sampton to the stage to read to us the mission statement from Lexington for Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber, and welcome to this evening's meeting. I want to say a little bit about our sponsoring group, Lexington for Palestine. Our group is local. It's made up of Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and non-religious people united in our call for a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to human rights violations committed by Israel against the Palestinians. This is our mission statement. We are an open group gathered in common purpose of connection to Palestine as a path for approaching justice in our communities and globally. For some of us, this emerges through our multifaceted relationships to the region. For others, a central concern is U.S. support of Israel and human rights violations being committed by Israelis against the Palestinians. We also see the ways that the question of Palestine resonates with local, national, and global human rights issues, as defined by the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which includes equal treatment under the law and freedom from discrimination based on race and ethnicity. The catastrophe in Palestine impacts our own community, affecting how some of us are seen and heard. Our group seeks to make public space for respectful conversations in our schools and community and among our neighbors to promote mutual understanding, curiosity, respect, and fair treatment for all. We stand against Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Arab racism, anti-Palestinian racism, and we stand against all racisms. We see them as being historically and contemporarily interrelated and believe we can best struggle against them when we recognize this. We are dedicated to making a space for all generations to explore their relationships to the region and to each other, and to learn about issues of justice together. We are united in our commitment to imagine democratic, equitable, and peaceful futures in Israel and Palestine and beyond. I want to add one more thing. As a Jewish member of this group, I want to briefly say what it means to me. I have family in Israel, and I'm unable to tolerate this ongoing war. There is no peace and safety for my family in the region without peace and safety for all in Palestine. Meeting other members of this group has given me hope. They also have family and relatives in Palestine and agonize daily over their suffering and threats to their safety. Together, we can change the narrative in America to see Israel-Palestine as a home for peoples with equal rights, treated equally under the law and living in peace. Education, such as this meeting, is a key part of this task. And there is a list being passed around for our mailing list. If you want to join our mailing list, please email us at lexforpalestine@gmail.com. Thank you very much. Amal.
Good evening, and thank you everybody for being here. We gather today knowing that Israel has killed more than 37,000 Palestinians in Gaza in the last 8 months, with thousands more waiting to be recovered in the rubble, in what the ICJ has called a plausible genocide. There are no universities left in Gaza. Hundreds of schools have been damaged and destroyed. Israel has decimated the healthcare system and the agricultural lands and at least 86,000 homes. That is, Israel has not only made Gaza unlivable today, the people of Gaza will be struggling for the basic infrastructures of life for years to come, struggling against tons of rubble and worlds of loss. Still, they assert their dignity and love for each other and for Palestine. When I went to Palestine in March, I heard the parents of a 17-year-old martyr, a boy, killed by Israeli soldiers a few months earlier, say, Alhamdulillah, thank God, for all that they still have. That gratitude, despite the deepest grief, has resonated with me across the months. In my small part of the world here, a blessing in this truly horrific world has been finding community here. Truly, truly, truly. Today I'm going to talk about the place where I really first learned about community vitality, about how people support each other in dire times. Ida refugee camp residents nurture each other every day, in spite of, and indeed in direct challenge to, the ongoing violence of Israeli military occupation, despite the generations of fragmentation that are a result of settler colonialism, and they support each other in the face of the indignities and everyday stresses and deprivations that late capitalism imposes upon most people of this world, including them. And I'm reading partly to make very tight use of my time. And it is the job of the professor in the room, which is me, to start off with a few minutes of overview about the violent fragmentation that is a condition of Palestinian life today. And I'll say that in the first part of what I'm talking about, I'm going to use book covers as like citations to is a tricky mouse. Okay, here we go. Oh, that was what I was trying to say, which we can come back to. Okay, so yes, I want to take a few moments to talk about the overview of this violent fragmentation that is a condition of Palestinian life today. We Palestinians feel it here in Lexington, even as we know that those in and around Palestine feel it ever so much more sharply. Zionism is a settler colonial and ethno-nationalist movement that has driven what Rashid Khalidi writes about as a 100-year war in Palestine. Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, which was a multi-ethnic, multi-religious space of flourishing for many. And I say that not at all to deny the forms of violence that it enabled and enacted, in particular, the Armenian genocide. It is nevertheless true that Palestinians in the 19th and early 20th centuries were made up of Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Across the region of Southwest Asia and North Africa, Jewish communities thrive not only in Hebron and Safed and Jerusalem, but in Baghdad and Algiers and Casablanca and Cairo. Those are all my references. After World War I, Palestine came under British colonial rule as part of its mandate. Zionism was supported by the British, even as France and the UK also made conflicting promises to Arab leaders in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. There's the mandates. As Omar Baum writes about, including in this graphic historical novel, as part of the rise of ethno-nationalisms, European anti-Semitism was in many ways exported to the region of Southwest Asia and North Africa, even as people in the region struggled to retain their diversity. After the genocide of more than 6 million Jews in Europe in the Nazi Holocaust, the crisis of Jewish refugees necessarily took the world's attention. Laurie Allen writes about how Palestinian leaders addressing the 1946 Anglo-American Commission of Inquiry expressed their willingness to welcome Jewish refugees into a state of its citizens, even as those Palestinian leaders rejected the idea of an exclusivist Jewish state in their homeland. Instead, the UN proposed partition that privileged the Jewish minority. Partition led to war. Palestinians call this the Nakba, a catastrophe in which about 750,000 Palestinians became refugees, and even the Palestinians who remained lost the fabric of their cities and villages. Over 400 villages were depopulated as a result of that. And Palestinians came to be divided into refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, the West Bank, and Gaza. About 150,000 Palestinians, including my father, stayed in what's inside what became Israel. Most lived under Israeli military law until 1966. Those military laws were adapted from the British colonial rules. In 1967, Israel expanded the territory under its control. Again, Israel built on British colonial laws to create the foundations for military occupation that has lasted for 57 years. This division between civil and military law and the differential treatment of Palestinians, both inside Israel's 1948 territories and in the occupied territories of the West Bank and Gaza, make up the foundation of Israel's apartheid system today. Here's just a few of the human rights reports that document this. And a key feature of this over the last decades has been closure and siege and blockade. Certainly you know about that in the case of Gaza, many of you. It also led to the isolation of Palestinians in Aida refugee camp, which is where I'll turn in the second part of my talk. That's my book, which I can talk about more later, but I'm rushing through. So this is Aida refugee camp, a relatively small refugee camp on the northern edge of Bethlehem. I have to emphasize it's small because it looms so large in the lives of so many who become connected to it. I have experience with this community spanning over 20 years as a scholar and volunteer at LGTV, which is a community-based organization that charts a path of principled service to the community across realms of sports, children's extracurricular activities, community health, music, and a preschool in collaboration with its close partner, the Massachusetts-based, oops, sorry, that's the wrong image. That's the Leisure Center Activities. In collaboration with its close partner, Massachusetts-based 143.org. Despite endless and suffocating military incursions in prison, which was sort of that tear gas slide that I showed, I found a welcoming home or homes in Aida. I learned how one pot can feed a crowd, how many hands can build a dancing stage or plant a hydroponic garden. fast forward, last year, working with partners in IDA and LGTV Center, we decided to undertake a collaborative oral history project of LGTV Center and IDA Camp, focusing on practices of friendship, sadaqa, dignity, karama, and fun, al-mada. Okay, I wanted to explore how friendship, dignity, and fun honor the past and create a sense of possibility for the future. And as I was formulating this project, this iftar centered my thinking. This was from 2023. An occasion in which people gathered for a shared meal during Ramadan that honored and nourished some of the community's most vulnerable members. But as I was planning that, I'm sorry, no. Of course, then the war began. There was no more talk of fun, and no more research on fun for the time being. But in a brief visit to Palestine in March, I did embark on this research about friendship and mutual aid, and on friendships between IDA and Gaza. I'm not going to talk about that now, but I could later if you're interested. For reasons of time, I want to focus on the institutional work at LGTV Center, where the context in IDA is that over 60 people from IDA have been arrested since October, more than doubling the number of prisoners from IDA. Most are held without charge, using the policy of administrative detention that allows Israel to hold people without charge for 6-month renewable terms, so basically indefinitely. And this is, again, a British colonial policy. Most arrests happened at night, and they're very dangerous. During one of these raids last fall, soldiers killed Muhammad Ali al-Azia, age 17, while he was on the stairway outside his home early in the morning. I don't know if I can go back to that image right now. There he is. People in the camp have also been suffering from deepening poverty, as those who worked in Israel lost jobs and the Palestinian Authority could not pay its employees for months on end. So I asked the leader of LGTV Center, who is on this side of the picture, Muhammad al-Azza, how do you be a good friend to people in prison? To those who've lost the last scraps of financial stability that they might have enjoyed. He answered that on a personal level, he stayed in touch with the prisoners' families. He called and visited them. He had also made a commitment as the leader of a community-based organization to support families who had lost income due to these imprisonments, especially during Ramadan, and also to support people, those who had lost income due to job losses. But this year there would be no big meals together. That's too celebratory. And people were more in need of direct food aid, not just one meal. So LGTV Center was able to distribute coupons to people to support families so they could buy the food they needed from local stores and eat at home in their own homes together. As he told me, quote, "We are a cultural organization, not a charity, but in a situation like this, we are forced to help families. At the same time, it's not an easy decision, because on a political level, it could be dangerous for the organization to support prisoners. Supporting the families of prisoners in the camp, as far as Israel is concerned, could impact us. Any organization could face penalties, as have others. So we try to be careful in our work. Nevertheless, we can't just raise our hands and say it's not our business, because our work is with the families of the camp." Weeks later, as we'll hear from Katie, the Israeli army arrested LGTV Center staff member, apparently due to his Facebook posts. He is a community health worker. He's a community health worker who visited elders in the camp to take their blood pressure, check their diabetes indicators, and so forth. He's someone who, as you can tell, brings delight and company when he makes these visits. We spoke to my partner Nidal's mother, because she's one of his patients, about his arrest. And when we did this, she started reciting poetry. Multiple verses of poetry in honor of Mahmoud. And then I went back to the folks at LGTV. I said, I talked to Qasim about the arrest of Mahmoud, and she started reciting poetry. And they said, we're not surprised. She always does that when Mahmoud comes over and when the other health workers come over. So these intergenerational forms of care are what bring people through the toughest of times. As his coordinator in the healthcare unit said, Aya Darwish, Mahmoud is all the time laughing and smiling as he's working, and because of this, we need him to be free. So as I've said, I've learned from my friends at LGTV Center and the broader community of 1 for 3, which spans about 3 continents now, over the last years about community solidarity and friendship itself, visiting people in need, being steady and stable, and offering support that respects boundaries and dignity. I'll tell you what, it's really hard to be a friend from afar. especially when, as my friend Mohammed Laza told me a few days ago, there is no safety here, he said, from Palestine, whether before October or after it. The LETV Center continues to be a home for cultivating both individual friendships as well as structures where social solidarities can thrive. Thanks.
Thank you so much. No, I'll stay right here. I'm Katie. Please forgive me, I'm also going to be reading to stay on message and respect your time. I'm new to Palestine. This is the first time I've talked about any of this content. And here's a little bit about how I got here. In architecture school, my friend Sarah and I lucked into the world's best mentor, Hubert Murray. I was dating and then later married my husband, who is a Palestinian American, and we now have 4 kids. Earlier this year, Hubert connected our family to his longtime friends, Amal and Nadal and their family, who are deeply involved in Palestine, and Bethlehem, and Ida Camp, and the Lashley Center. And concurrently, Lexington for Palestine was forming. So it turns out Hubert has been architecting with the Lashley Center for years, specifically in support of the kindergarten, which opened in 2021. The Lashley Center is gearing up for new capital improvements, and the team welcomed me and Sarah and our teams, including Connor, who's here today, so we're in the back to the work. So we asked Nadal about tagging along on his next trip to Palestine. So here's the geography. I'm going to be talking fast and zooming in step by step. We flew into Amman and drove west. On the right is Jordan. You can see the Dead Sea and the Jordan River. The middle is Palestine, and Israel is to the left behind the Green Line, which is the international boundary established in 1949. The West Bank is tiny, and here's how I wrap my head around it. This is the shape of the West Bank superimposed on Metro Boston. If you consider the harbor and the ocean kind of the east, you can drive as far as basically Waltham before hitting the western boundary. But the entire West Bank is occupied, so you can't always evenly just simply go from point A to point B. All of these different colors represent areas and levels of Israeli control. The gray are military zones, firing zones, and areas behind physical barriers. Pink are Israeli nature preserves, and light blue is Area C, which, please somebody ask somebody else about, because I still don't totally understand it, but it does mean that Israel exerts near total control. Checkpoints are everywhere, and the illegal settlements don't even show up at this scale. We spent most of our time in Bethlehem, where Ida Camp is. And you can see at this scale the Israeli encroachment across the Green Line. The purplish color are illegal settlements, and the big red line is the apartheid wall, a 25-foot tall concrete barrier. I'll zoom in again to Ida Camp, where we'll focus. The pink outlines Ida Camp, which is about 17 acres and home to about 7,000 people. The Lashley Center is next to it in yellow, and the heavy red line again is the wall. The 7 red dots are armed watchtowers. The wall and the occupation it represents dominates. I was really surprised, and I just want to show you these images before returning briefly to the maps. A figure ground map is a helpful tool to crudely understand a place physically. Here I notice the density of the buildings, the shape of the streets, and how little green space there is. So just take this map in for a second, and I'll switch to a familiar place. This is Lexington at the same scale. And here are the maps side by side. So now I notice how much green space I see in Lexington, and I think about all of the amenities we have in just this tiny area. And then I imagine what would happen if a concrete wall and 7 sniper towers were imposed on our community. On our first day, we met the Lajee architectural team, Majd, Musa, Ruaid, and Amira. I should mention, Musa is Mohammed. It's the same person, but he uses a nickname. Majd, the regional director in Palestine, walked us through Ida Camp. Here's a view from the Lajee Center balcony looking north. So the wall is just beyond, and the entrance to Ida Camp is to the left. You can see the monumental Kiev return. And to the right, just out of frame, is the wall right at the end of the street and the doors to the military area from which soldiers often come marauding unprovoked. This is the most tear gas place on the planet. A shop here turns spent tear gas canisters into jewelry and artwork. The canisters are all stamped, made in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of beauty here. There's street art everywhere. It tells the story of the community, its memories, its hopes for the future. Everything is made of concrete, and I find this actually super appealing, because I'm an architect, and also technically impressive. There's not much of a public realm, things like sidewalks, street trees. There's accent or ad hoc utilities, and services are the topic of another talk. But people carve out moments of beauty and public joy. And when you turn into the private realm, it's magical. There are lovely, lush courtyards where families congregate. And if you're ever invited inside a home, accept the invitation. The interiors are exquisite, and we were cared for and fed like royalty. This is the world's best makluba, and please nobody leave that to my mother-in-law. Following the Nakba, UNRWA issued refugees tents. When it became clear that return was not imminent, the tents were upgraded to simple concrete structures, of which 2 remain. This is one of them. 76 years later, Ida Camp has been basically totally rebuilt. Often, different branches of a big family live together, and floors are added to buildings over time. Now the work. Architecturally, we can cram 10 pounds of potatoes into a 5-pound bag. That is our job. But Lajee needs to creatively cram 100 pounds of potatoes into a 5-pound bag because space is so constrained, and the center does so many things with and for so many people. It's a shared oasis. Lajee operates in a pre-existing 3-story concrete block building on a fairly busy corner. The center includes a precious park. If you'll remember, it was the only green space on the map. Kids congregate there all day. There's play equipment, public art, and a shady olive grove. At the far end of the property, there's a busy soccer field, the soccer football pitch. The soccer club also trains at a gym on the ground floor of the main building, where there are also exercise classes, a youth circus school, physical therapy, rehabilitation services. Lajee's uppermost level includes a library, an art gallery, multi-purpose community room that holds, among other things, music and dabka classes. There are also offices for the 15 full-time and 15 part-time employees. Here's the best part, the glorious rooftop, packed with hydroponic gardens, and 2 greenhouses that grow food for the community. Botanist Majd describes the plants and shows us the latest crop of microgreens, which were soon harvested and served as part of a free community lunch. Majd dreams about expanding the growing space, of cultivating mushrooms, and of building a rabbit hutch, not for food, but as therapy animals for the children. The lowest level of Lajee has 2, soon to be 3, kindergarten classrooms, each serving 25 kids, and a protected kindergarten yard. Part of our task was to observe and advise regarding the ongoing construction of a new building that will accommodate a 3rd classroom, and to propose a plan for updating the play yard, which is in the works. These classrooms comprise Jasmine Flower School, run by Principal Maggie. It's a progressive Reggio Emilia style kindergarten that centers play and emotional intelligence, that emphasizes the whole child and connects back to families. We met individually with mothers of current and recent students. They report that their kids come home feeling loved and like the most important child in the world. They also shared some of the trauma that their kids face. This is Nadine. Her husband Saddam was kidnapped by the Israeli army in the middle of the night and held for over a year, never charged. He was released last month. He'd lost 40 pounds and was beaten daily. His family saw him get taken. According to Nadine, her 2 little boys freaked out, of course, and her kindergarten daughter, Malik, just froze, and then she stopped speaking. The teachers and Maggie have worked with Malik all year. They asked her what she wanted, what they could do, and her wish was to be heard. So they helped her make a book about her story. And by sharing her book, she learned that other kids' dads have been taken too. She's now regaining her speech. We also interviewed several mothers together. These moms talked candidly about mom stuff, their work, their hobbies, their kids, and the challenges of stretching reduced pay or no pay at all for 8 or 9 months. They talk about how afraid their kids have been since October, hearing fighter jets overhead and wondering what'll happen next. Their kids have regressed in potty training, behavior, and sleep, and the school is a total lifeline. The day we met with this group of mothers was really tough because earlier that morning, the occupation forces took Lachey's community health worker, Mahmoud, who Emma was just talking about. There were no charges. Everyone is and was still deeply upset, and yet the work continued. 2 days later, and now missing a key provider, the health team hosted a free medical day. That day was a huge success. It served over 165 patients, offering free medicine, free exams, consultations. The need here is great and matched only by the community's ability to meet it. We're working hard to help the team build a new women's workshop, an expanded gym, a permanent healthcare center, an improved kindergarten yard, a new classroom building, putting solar panels on the rooftop. That's the work at hand and the task that we brought home. But we also brought home new friendships, and from each person we met in Palestine, stories. These stories aren't mine to tell, not in this context anyway, but they're now mine to hold, and mine to hope with, and mine to care for. Thank you.
Thank you both. My name is Sarah. I am so deeply honored to be on this panel with these 2 brilliant individuals. I'm a ministry associate at the First Parish in Lincoln, and in February and March I joined a 23-person solidarity delegation to the West Bank and East Jerusalem. I was there with 22 other clergy and faith leaders from 12 different faith denominations. We were invited by Christian Palestinians who were crying out, asking for the church to speak up and say, call it what it is. This is apartheid, this is genocide, and as people of faith, we are called to be in solidarity with those that are oppressed. And so we answered that call to go and see and to hear the stories. And we spent a week there traveling. We stayed in Bethlehem. We were at the church. I don't know if some of you may have seen the display around Christmas time by the church in Bethlehem, the Christ Under the Rubble nativity that the minister there said, if Jesus were to have been born today, he would have been born under the rubble. And so we were called to go and bear witness to where the suffering is today and to bring that story back. When we returned, we brought those stories to Washington, D.C. and engaged in advocacy. And we met with politicians, and we also engaged in direct action and civil disobedience in an attempt to call for a permanent ceasefire as well as an end to funding of the Israeli military as well as other demands. And so I am trying to pack a lot of experiences. We met with, I think, 25, we had 25 meetings over the span of 5 days. And so I'm just going to pick a little bit here and there to try and bring some of those stories. And as Katie said, these are not my stories to tell, but I'm bringing them back in hopes that we then can say, now what, for many of us, what shall we do? Okay, so thank you. I'm going to focus in on a couple different locations. First of all, in East Jerusalem. I spent a couple days in East Jerusalem. What we see there is several different matrices of oppression, several different matrices of apartheid. One of the things I want to focus on is infrastructure. So what we see here on the top of these different buildings, this is in the Palestinian section of East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is a Palestinian city that is annexed illegally by Israel after 1967. And while the Palestinians that are there are still living in their homeland, they are now, many of the folks that I met with said, I'm a citizen of no nation, because as I was born here, this is my homeland, this is where my ancestors lived. I don't have a passport, I don't have citizenship. What they have is permanent residency status. And that permanent residency status can be threatened at any point in time. In this particular neighborhood, that is a Palestinian neighborhood, they are being surrounded by Israeli settlements in and amongst this Palestinian city. So while there are settlements in the West Bank, there are also settlements in East Jerusalem as part of the attempt to remove all Palestinians from East Jerusalem. And so what you'll find is you'll have a Palestinian neighborhood and an Israeli settlement right next to one another. And when you take a look at those two areas side by side, you'll see on the top of some buildings, water tanks. Those are on top of Palestinian homes. And on the other buildings, right directly across the street, no water tanks. Those are the Israeli homes. And this is because the infrastructure is controlled so that at any point in time, water can be cut off and there's no water available to Palestinian homes, whereas water is always accessible to Israeli homes. And so the Palestinians there have water tanks in order to maintain somewhat of a water supply in the midst of those cutoffs. The same thing happens with electricity. The same thing happens with any other sort of just local town support, trash disposal, sidewalks. As we were walking down the street in one area, there's plenty of sidewalks, there's plenty of parking, it's safe to be there. And that's in the Israeli neighborhoods. And you turn the street, turn the corner, and now all of a sudden you're in a Palestinian neighborhood and there's nowhere to park. And there are no sidewalks, and it's very dangerous to try and move around in traffic. The man that I was spending the day with said, Palestinians, we don't want to be, people call us criminals. We're not criminals, there's just nowhere to park. We're not trying to park illegally, we just don't have anywhere to park. And that would be like a constant refrain of, this is not who we are, it's just we don't have the resources because they're being taken from us. And from a variety of ways, and then funneled into Israeli neighborhoods at the expense of the Palestinian neighborhoods. Another matrices of control is in terms of that infrastructure is that wall, as Katie talked about. We looked at it from one side. This is from the East Jerusalem side. As we were driving along on Jericho Road, we saw, Jericho Road is this important section, avenue of commerce. It was one of the most important areas for just commerce, businesses. It was a thriving and lively neighborhood. And then when the wall went up, this part of the wall finally went up in 2015, it completely severed, cut into these Palestinian communities from one another, so that now all of a sudden businesses are getting affected from this. Families are separated from one another, so if somebody worked at the family business that's now on the other side of the wall, they can't go and work with their family anymore. We stopped, we were just driving along Jericho Road, and all of a sudden, right in front of you, there's the wall. We stopped at this little convenience store. I was talking to the owner, Ahmed, and he was saying, I've completely lost touch with my family that's on the other side of the wall. I'm not able to go and see them. When I try and go home from work, You know, it should take me 20 minutes, it could take me 2 hours, it could take me 4 hours, it could take me 5 hours. So I said, so you don't know what time you should leave in order to get home from work safely, because at night, you know, you don't want to be out at night. He said, I don't know when I leave if I'm going to make it home at all. Another area in East Jerusalem is the neighborhood of Silwan. Silwan is under particular threat right now because the Israeli government, the first picture that I put up there was a view of the old city of Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. I should have put it over here, but just to the side of the old city is Silwan. So I'm taking this picture from the old city right now, looking at Silwan. And the Israeli government would like to clear out Silwan in order to build a religious theme park, in order to maximize on the old city, right? In order to have an area for tourists to go and be. Another thing that they want to do is they want to connect the old city to the Mount of Olives via a tram. And in order to do that, they need to tear down Palestinian homes in this Palestinian neighborhood of Silwan. And so most of the buildings in that neighborhood, in this Palestinian neighborhood, are under demolition order. For a variety of reasons. Maybe they did some renovations in their kitchen, they replaced the sink, and they didn't have a permit to do that. Now they're under a demolition order. If your home is under a demolition order, you could be wake up one morning with a bulldozer coming into your home at any point in time. You never know when that's going to happen. So you're just constantly living under threat. When we were there, we visited the home of one such man who had this experience. This is Fakhri Abudia. He had his home demolished 2 weeks before we visited, and we went and visited with him at the rubble of his home. One morning, he and his wife and his kids and his grandkids were woken up by soldiers coming in saying, "Get out, get out." They thought that they were going to be killed. They were removed from their home and they watched their home be demolished. This was an act of political retribution because Fakhri is a community leader. He is someone who's engaged in organizing and resistance, particularly resistance of home demolitions, and he was targeted for home demolition as a result of that. Yet he continues his work. He hosted us there, and right as we were leaving, he was hosting more people to come and see what has happened, to continue to tell his story, and to continue to tell the story of his people. The visitor that was coming right after us was from the United States State Department. The US State Department knows what's going on. They have always known. I want to shift gears and talk about the West Bank a little bit, talking about Area C was mentioned before. It is an area of total Israeli control in the West Bank. We went to this farm on a hilltop outside of Bethlehem. It's owned by the Nasser family, Daoud. His family has owned this farm on this hilltop for 100 years. Since the Ottoman Empire. During the time of the Ottoman Empire, his grandfather purchased or made sure to have the papers from the Ottoman Empire to prove that he owned this land. So when Israel came in and colonized this land and began to try and steal it, he was able to show, I have the papers, this is my property. And yet, for the past 34 years, he has been in court, going from military court to eventually all the way up to the Supreme Court, trying to maintain this proof that this is his property, this is his land. This is important because all of the hilltops around his village are now Israeli settlements, illegal Israeli settlements, as all settlements are illegal under international law. And so they're surrounded by these settlers, and his property is a prime property in order to try and take over the entire village and the area that he's at. And so he continues to resist. They continue to go through the court system in order to maintain ownership of his land. And yet, since the last time I was there, settlers have come in and started building 2 roads on his property. Without the court's finally, the court system still has maintained, they're pushing him off, and he's continuing to fight that. While we were there, we were having dinner with him and his family, and 2 settlers that were dressed up in military fatigues and holding guns came onto his property and just started walking around his property and kind of walking around us. And he said, "What are you doing here? You're on my property." And they said, "This is our property. All of this is ours. All of this is ours." And this is an ongoing threat. And yet he continues, the family continues to farm. They continue to find ways to be resilient in the midst of this. Even though they have an order to not build, they turn their caves into buildings. Even though they have an order not to have electricity, they find a way to have solar power. Even though they can't have running water, they find ways around this. And so there's a constant way of trying to be resilient in the face of that and to build community in the face of that. So they hold camps on their property and they host international visitors to come and help them farm the land and tell their story. And so this family has become a really a beacon of hope for the village. In order to make sure that entire village doesn't end up getting demolished because of the way that they're continuing to fight this in court and bring international attention. Again, while we were there were Dutch officials that were there watching what's happening, learning his story, and so continuing to tell that story. There he is farming, and there we see a picture of one of the settlers there with his weapon, talking to his sister. I'll be brief. We moved on to, you want to handle that because I think you appreciate that. Moving on to Hebron, another one of the parts of control are all the checkpoints, of course. And since October 7th, I've been told again and again that trying to get anywhere in the West Bank, going somewhere that used to take 45 minutes, now takes 4, 5, 6 hours, could take all day. Checkpoints have multiplied. And particularly in Hebron, there are 6 ways in and out of the city of Hebron. Since October 7th, only one of them has been opened, so traffic in Hebron is horrendous. You see there, we're going into that checkpoint. As we're driving into that checkpoint, there were soldiers stationed in all the different towers, pointing their guns at us as we were entering into the city. We spent the day with Issa Amro, who's a human rights advocate, Palestinian human rights advocate, and nonviolent activist. And he brought us around Hebron. You can see all of the different stores are completely shut down. Since October 7th, everything is closed. And I keep on going. And another example of that. As we were touring and learning about the city, we encountered a group of Israeli settlers. We learned that there are 91 Israeli homes in a legal Israeli settlement inside the old city of Hebron. It's like 500-600 Israeli settlers living there. And sometimes they will go out on field trips outside of the settlement, and anytime they do, in an attempt to basically declare this is Israel, Hebron is Israel, and go and view all the different places that are significant to them and kind of use that as a way to try and claim that this is our land. And whenever they do that, they're surrounded by Israeli military. And so we encounter this example of Israeli soldiers just walking around. You'll see these little Palestinian children just walking up to the soldiers and looking at them. And this is part of their life. This is part of going home from school. This is part of, riding his bike in his neighborhood. Go ahead to the next one. Before I move on, I just wanted to lift up Issa Amro again. Issa told us about his several encounters that he's had. He was arrested after October 7th. He's one of the first people that was arrested. He is a nonviolent activist. Everybody knows he's a nonviolent activist. He is the idea. They know everybody's political affiliation. They know who he is, who he says he is. He was not arrested under any sort of valid reason. He was arrested because it was act of vengeance and control. And so as he was arrested, he shares publicly that he was tortured, he was sexually abused and tortured. He ended up being losing all feeling in his hands as a result of his hands being tied for so long, and still to that day when we were visiting, he still had not gained full use of his hands again months later. Since then, he has continued to get harassed by the IDF and by Israeli settlers. Just in the last couple weeks, he's had settlers attacking his home and trying to demolish his home. He took a video and posted it online recently of an Israeli settler trying to tear down a wall outside of his house, and a soldier was standing there just watching it happen and doing nothing. And then just this last week, he was also attacked. And I don't really know more details about that. Those details have not been made clear about what happened yet. I do know that he was attacked and brought to the hospital, and he is okay, and he will recover. But this is part of his ongoing reality since we left. We then spent time in the South Hebron Hills in a town called Atwani with the Harani family. They are, in Atwani, there's a series of small villages in the South Hebron Hills that are particularly rural and particularly vulnerable because of their isolation, because of all the settlements that are completely surrounding them and cutting them off. And the Harani family are a family of nonviolent peace activists in the heart of all of that. And so we spent the day with them hearing their stories. And I want to close, just given how, I think I've gone a little bit over, but we spent the day with Hafez Harani's children, in particular, Samiha Harani and Hamoudi Harani. And they brought us to a Bedouin village in a tent that's right next to a settlement. So there, you saw the tent, the outside of the tent that we met, that's the heart of this village, Khair. And right next to it, there is a fence and a settlement immediately connected. We met with some of the community leaders, and they told us about some of the violence from that settlement in the aftermath of October 7th, particularly a story of 4 settlers coming in the middle of the night, lining everybody, all the men up in that tent, and holding weapons to them, and torturing them and harassing them. In the aftermath of that, one of those settlers has been one of the settlers that is sanctioned by the Biden administration. And one of the community leaders that went through that experience said, well, thank you very much, but that's not exactly addressing the heart of the issue. That's like arresting somebody that did a lynching, but thinking that takes care of Jim Crow a little bit. And so that's one of the encounters that we had, and I think I'll go to the next one. We also went to, some of the kids came out and wanted us to take pictures with them. We also went into some of the local caves, because a lot of the homes, when they get demolished, there's nowhere for folks to go, and so they ended up going and renovating caves. And so I want to close with the story of the Youth of Samud, which is an organization that is developed by the children of Hafez Harani, which is Samiha and Hamoudi, as well as Sammy and other young people that basically have said we're going to come together and organize and support our communities. And so one of the ways they've done that is by going on this effort to renovate local caves in order to provide housing for folks when they have their homes demolished, and to return to many of the caves that some of their ancestors lived in as well. They also provide all sorts of community services like language classes. They provide meals for families that are isolated. They provide accompaniment for children on their way to school so that they're not attacked by settlers. And so they are finding all sorts of different ways to continue to resist and take care of their community in the midst of great oppression. And so for me, I'm coming at this, like I said, I'm coming at this from a lens of being in a faith community. It's very important to the heart of my theology to me is that God is on the side of the oppressed. And for me, if my faith and my theology is going to mean anything, it's going to mean that I must stand with Palestinians in this time and recognize that I am not free and that my faith is not really being lived out until Palestine is free. And so my hope is that as I bring some of these stories into the communities that I'm engaging in, as well as all of you, that we can think about ways in which that we can dismantle the theologies that have upheld this system, because so much of where this comes from is from bad theology and bad religion. And so holding myself accountable as a Christian, recognizing that Christian theology in many ways has produced this, and dismantling that and saying what would it look like to then partner with and be in collaboration with communities of all sorts, including faith communities, but living into that. And I hope to continue to partner with all of you in doing that.
We have time for questions now. Amber and myself have microphones, so please take a minute to think of a question and hope you'll ask it.
Thank you. This was very interesting. I really appreciate hearing everyone. I'd like to understand better about the wall. And in terms of Palestine and where it is. It seems to be going through cities. And I sort of, when I first thought about it, I also am interested in it in terms of the Green Line. So at first I sort of assumed it would be along the Green Line, but it seems to me that it's everywhere. So could you explain where it is?
The wall is, that's a very good observation. So actually the first big ICJ case before this year was a case against the wall. And one of the reasons why the ICJ found that to be an illegal wall is because it's all built on occupied, it's, you know, I think not all, but it's the vast majority of it is built on occupied land, not on the Green Line. And it's used as a way of creating land grabs and of dividing communities. So that's why, you know, in Ida Refugee Camp, there's a whole settlement between Ida Refugee Camp and the Green Line, Gilo settlement, and why we see it linking through East Jerusalem, which of course all of East Jerusalem is part of the West Bank, the occupied West Bank in 1967. So yes, it cuts through people's homes, it cuts people out of their homes, it cuts those commutes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
I think it's up to 11 miles in to the West Bank. I think that's how far it encroaches in certain parts. I'll just pull back that map if I can move my fingers fast.
And Sarah had said that, you know, it cut through people's house, cut through families, so that families, I would have thought that it would have been Israel on one side and Palestine on the other, but it seems to be Palestine on both sides.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's complete. It is intentionally organized in order to separate communities, and so there are communities on Palestinian communities on one side, Palestinian communities on the other, and since the wall went up, there are folks that have not been able to go back over to their cousin's house, their neighbor's house, and it's just completely separated. One of the other things I mentioned, it goes through people's backyards. To the point that I was told that I drove by his home, that the wall cuts through his backyard. So if he actually goes into his backyard, he then the Israeli military will say that he is his center of life is no longer in East Jerusalem, which then threatens his permanent residency because he's spending too much time on the other side of the wall. And so he's no longer able to make use of his own land. At the risk of him losing his permanent residency card.
I'll just say one more thing, which is that the wall, of course, like all infrastructure of occupation, imposed unilaterally on Palestinians. So in the early 2000s, when we were seeing the wall being built at Ida Refugee Camp, there was a time when we didn't know where the wall was going to be built. because there was no consultation or awareness or anything. It was like, what's that bulldozer doing today? You know what I mean? So completely unilateral for the purported good of security of Israel, although we see that it does not produce Israeli security, and also absolutely militarizes Palestinian space. It's been the source of so much violence, along all the communities that it abuts.
First of all, I just wanted to say that was incredible. It was very eye-opening. I'll say, Katie, your story with Nadine got very emotional. Just that small account, I was almost overwhelmed. How they just face daily reality and keep going. So I just wanted to know how we as a community here in Lexington, what can we do to support the LGTV community?
Well, I mean, I think there's so many things that we can do. Learning, talking, helping to support these initiatives. I mean, it's a really distinct case in this story where, like, with all of us, my partner, he grew up in a refugee camp, lived so many dimensions of the violence of Israeli occupation, and has been able to build a partnership with an organization, the LGTV Center, which is like really incredible because it's politically independent. It's it's dedicated to people's thriving in so many ways. One for Three is able to support the initiatives of LGTV Center that they want to see come to fruition, like this preschool, and then it brings the expertise of so many people in this room who I can't find right now exactly, but who've been supporting, like, making this an incredibly distinct place, like making that school into a Reggio Emilia school, right, where kids learn through doing, learn through picking the olives from the olives in the back in the garden. You know what I mean? So they learn in a really grounded Palestinian way, and create that community and that foundation that carries them all the way through, right? Through youth activities, music groups, gubka groups, traveling, and then we also, we're able to, it's newly amazing that we can, not that new, but to take care of
this work, we really arm them with the skills to protect their dignity and to keep them in a very complicated, very hard situation there in the refugee camps. And it is our responsibility, because either we like it or not, our tax dollars, not only the United States government's dollars, us, our tax dollars, contributes to this mess. So it's our moral, human rights responsibility to learn about the situation and find the best way to help it forward.
I know a little bit, and so I'll pitch in what I know, and then Al could fill in the rest. But UNRWA is mandated to provide education in the West Bank, and that education, I believe, starts at first grade. So there just is no kind of baseline kindergarten. There are a couple other kindergartens in Ida Camp, and one is in the basement of a mosque. I think the other one is at home and maybe doesn't operate anymore. There are other options, but they're prohibitively expensive. So my impression is that the children who don't attend the Jasmine Flower School just don't receive that level of education at kindergarten. And the LGTV Center has offset all of the tuition for the past year and is trying to do the same for the upcoming year. And I'm actually curious to hear about the UNRWA system and education and sort of what the rest of the primary education looks like.
So UNRWA schools operate particularly for refugees and mostly in refugee camps, and the Palestinian Authority operates, K through 12, or I guess 1 through 12 education in other parts. And then there's a private education system. children. Children are impacted by this at every level, as we're hearing. And differently according to their circumstances, right? In the Hebron Hills, you can get people. Maybe you can say more about people can't even get to schools, right? But also the checkpoints and the closures this year. They, in particular, they keep teachers from getting to school. Right now, a lot of kids, some of the schools are half virtual because the teachers can't get there every day because they're also not getting paid their salaries if they work for the Palestinian Authority, which means that, and transportation is expensive. So the teachers can't get to work because of checkpoints or because they can't pay for their transportation. So the kids are online. This is how many years of disruption. Palestinians would thrive is a lot because of, right? They've been the most right. So picking up all is so important and strengthening those things. I don't know if you want to say more about Hebron Hills.
Sure. So a couple things in Hebron itself. There's and as well as in the surrounding area, there's an organization called the Community Peacekeepers Team, and they do accompaniment to walk children to school. And so, particularly in Hebron, there's a whole community of Palestinians that are living within an even higher, more highly occupied zone, basically that has just 30 or something checkpoints within it, and they're in order to, and nobody that lives outside of that area can go into it. And so basically the children have to walk to the exterior checkpoint, get picked up by the community peacekeeper team there, and then they walk them to school. And they stay outside of the school all day and then walk them back to that checkpoint and watch them get through the checkpoint. And the reason they do that is because children so often get picked up for administrative detention, either on the way to school or at school. And so if they get picked up and nobody knows, then their parents don't know what happened to them. And so often these are folks that will, if the kid gets picked up, will call, they'll be on the phone with the Red Crescent, they'll be on the phone with different organizations to say, this kid is being detained, just to report it to somebody, right? And they'll oftentimes be there watching the kids get through the checkpoint and watching them be detained, and they'll be on the phone with an organization to let them know, to report that they're being detained. The organization will call the IDF and say, the IDF will say, we don't have them, and they'll say, no, we've got somebody with eyes on the kid right now. And so we know that you have them, and so that's one thing that happens, that they're constantly being monitored and at risk of detention at any given point. And the same thing is happening in the South Hebron Hills, and these are in rural areas. So in these cases, kids are having to walk miles to school, and they're surrounded. They're totally separated from communities, separated by settlements, and so settlers are known to. Across the globe that does not have this Zionist theology. It is a uniquely American evangelical phenomenon. Palestinians, there are Palestinian Christians, as you mentioned, that do not have this theology. But this American branch of Christianity has exported Zionism around the globe and has ended up partnering with cultural Zionists, political Zionists, in order to basically support their own agenda of trying to get all Jewish people in the world back into Jerusalem in order to jumpstart the end times. So that's another part of theology, is that it's God's will that all Jewish people everywhere get back to Israel in order to jumpstart the end times. And eventually when that happens, then Jesus will return, the tribulation will happen. I could talk about this for a long time, but I won't. There are charts, there are maps, there's timelines. There's a cow, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Part of the theology is that the temple needs to be rebuilt. That's another part of the Christian Zionist doctrine. But it is a uniquely American theological evangelical phenomenon. It is not a historical, traditional belief in Christianity. Yeah, I don't know what else to say, but I can talk about it. It's well, someone else can speak to whether or not it is a Jewish theology. I don't believe it to be.
I'll just say one thing. It's not a Jewish. There's a ethno-nationalist Zionist philosophy, which is what is the rabid settler movement, and that uses the sort of teachings of the Torah to justify land engransment. And this is what the right wing Israeli government is about, but it's not a specific Jewish theology. It's an ethno-nationalist approach.
I have a question that's related but differently. I'm aware of an organization called the Abraham Initiatives. Do you know that? The Abraham Fund? Actually, does anybody ever hear of this fund?
But you don't mean the Abraham Accords?
No.
No.
It is an organization I learned about 10 years ago and actually donated quite a bit of money to, that is an association of, they're based on Abrahamic religions, and to create unity and understanding between Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and Jews. And they were recently, well, I wouldn't say recently, I guess about 4 years ago, they came to the United States to do fundraising and so forth. And it seems like a very laudable organization. So I guess it boils down to there's got to be some empathetic Jewish people in Israel who are concerned about what you're talking about. And I think this organization is one, but evidently you don't know about it, and I'm wondering if there are others.
Margaret, I just mentioned there's two very important Jewish organizations. One is Jewish Voice for Peace, and the other is If Not Now. And both of these organizations are made up of Jews who are fighting the Zionist impetus, which is what has controlled most of the Jewish thinking, and especially the right-wing political organizations like AIPAC, which donates to congressmen. But Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now have been very much involved in solidarity with anti-Zionist and opposing the settler colonial efforts, and they've been very involved in the campus protests. So if you want to look at Jewish opposition, Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now are two organizations.
Was your first trip to Palestine? Yes, this was my first. Okay, so you went through Tel Aviv, right? Did go through Tel Aviv. Yes. Can you tell us your experience? Because I know a lot of people when they go to Ben Gurion and when they go purposely to Palestine, or they give them a very hard time, and sometimes they go deported and they go back to the U.S. Oh yes, I do have a story about my experience both coming in and coming out. So on my way in, so we all traveled individually because we were coming from different parts of the country. And so I was the first to arrive, and traveling by myself. I had to stop through customs and get my visa. They asked me where I was going. I'm staying in Jerusalem. I'm staying with a friend. What's your friend's name? I told them the name. Where does your friend live? Actually, I don't know her address, and the reason I was told not to say her address is because she lives in a Palestinian neighborhood, and they said if they know that you're going to be staying in a Palestinian neighborhood, you're going to have a harder time. You don't know where your friend is, and I'm like, well, it's my friend's daughter, and so they introduced me through. So I don't know if she's sending a taxi. She ended up taking my passport, making me go and call the person that I was staying with and have her send a picture of her visa. in order to let me in. It took 10-15 minutes. It wasn't that bad on the way in, but it was a little bit trickier to get in, and I was facing more intense scrutiny on the way out. I dropped off my luggage, checked my bag, got through security, made it all the way to the gate, and thought, oh, that was so easy. Sarah Klukowski, please report to security desk. And so I made my way back. Security has a couple more questions for you. First of all, security made me wait for another 20-30 minutes for them to even show up. They showed up, asked me a couple questions, full view of everybody. By that point, one of my group members was there in the airport with me, but he was not standing next to me. He was like watching me be interrogated from like afar, just to kind of keep an eye on me. They eventually take me to a back room with, no windows, no nothing, no clocks, took my watch, took my phone, took my passport. Made me go through extra security. I had to get everything scanned another 2-3 times. I had to go through another body scan, another invasive pat down. And they kept asking me questions. Where did you go? Who did you see? Why were you here? What was this church group you were with? Why did you go to did you go spend any time in Israel? Why didn't you said you wanted to see what's going on here? Why didn't you spend any time in Israel? And so on and on and on. And just had a lot of extra interrogation. I discovered the reason that they did this is because they had gone through my checked bag and found some books, and one in particular is a little pamphlet from Out of Your Prisoner Support, which is an organization that is a legal aid organization for people that have been facing administrative detention. And that organization has been listed by Israel as a terrorist organization. And so because I had this pamphlet that is from a legal aid society, I was then facing extra interrogation. And so they didn't find anything, of course. There was no reason to have me detained, but they kept me up until like 5 minutes before my flight was taking off, to give me just enough time to race to the other side of the airport as the doors were closing. I just made my flight. So that was my experience going through Tel Aviv. I was the only person that had that experience, and we all decided it's because I was the youngest one on the trip, and because of my hair and my nose piercing. I read as a liberal man.
I went in through Jordan and out through Tel Aviv, but I'm old now, so I didn't have any problems.
I think we have time for one more question if somebody wants to ask the last question here.
So one of the tactics that Zionists use worldwide to try to suppress the Palestinian movement is whenever a queer person speaks up for Palestine, they paint this image that Palestine is a super violent area where queer people are constantly under threat. And I've heard from a lot of the queer people who work with Palestinian Americans that it's very far from that. I was wondering if y'all had any insight on that.
Yeah, pinkwashing is a really insipid, a really insidious way of, sort of using. It's a really Orientalist, reductive way of, painting Palestinians and Arabs as backwards, and to, of course, also to wash over the fact that actually, Israel is moving farther and further to the right, and there's not a respect for queer communities inside Israel, and also that Israel uses many forms of sexual violence and harassment of queer people to break apart movements and to criminalize people and to to destroy lives, right? So there's some excellent scholarship about that out there, and thank you for raising that. I don't know if anyone else wants to.
I'll just say anecdotally, a couple things is that this came up in many of the meetings that I had with different religious leaders, faith communities, community organizations, and I heard repeatedly from folks, when you go back, make sure you let them know that there are Palestinians here that affirm gay rights. And I just want you to know, you can tell them you met Palestinians who believe in gay rights. So bring that message back is one of the things they said. And then another thing that, just to mention is that we had a member of the team was an out trans man, and I don't want to speak to his experience. I don't know what he internally was experiencing, but from what I observed externally, there were no issues anywhere we went, whether we were in cities or whether we were in people's rural areas. Everywhere we went, I did not observe that. And again, he may have had a different experience. That was not my observation.
Well, I'd like to thank our speakers. I think everybody should give them a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, Katie, and Amal, for the wonderful experiences you shared with us and the stories. And I hope that their stories connected with all of us today. And what we have to take with us today is a different kind of experience, a different kind of value for the Palestinian people, and what we can do in this time for our brothers and sisters who are struggling over there. Thank you all for coming here today. I know it's a weekday. It must be difficult for most of you, but thank you so much for coming, and have a good evening.
Also, just a reminder that we have weekly standouts. If you can follow us on Instagram, you'll get the latest location. They tend to be right near Wilson Farms on Mass Ave. We're having a standout in solidarity with healthcare workers next Friday, the 21st, but really you should check out the Instagram or get on our email list so you can come on out. We'd love to, and they're really great places for talking and meeting and being together. So thanks.